Imagine your favorite team not winning a single game for almost 3 years. Well, we don't have to imagine it because it actually happened to the Chicago Cardinals from 1942 to 1945. They lost 29 consecutive football games. Now, we clown the Lions and the Browns for having winless seasons in the recent past, but even they didn't compare to this. This was right during the middle of World War II, so I wouldn't imagine most people were too concerned with the NFL, but still, 29 straight losses is pretty impressive. During this time period, the NFL only consisted of 2 divisions, the East and the West. The Cardinals were a part of the West Division. In 1942, week number 6 against the Lions was the final time that the Cardinals would celebrate a win for what seemed like an eternity. For the rest of that season, Chicago lost by an average of over 16 points per game. Their quarterback Bud Schwenk threw 27 interceptions compared to his 6 touchdown passes, and their leading rusher Marshall Goldberg only had 369 yards at the end of the season. Now, the 1943 season offered some new hope for Cardinals fans. With a new quarterback and a change in their running game, things could only go up, right? Wrong. Their new quarterback, Ronnie Cahill, threw 21 interceptions to just 3 touchdowns. And their new fullback, John Grigas, did even worse than Marshall Goldberg did the year prior, only managing 333 yards on the ground. The Cardinals went a pathetic 0-10, but they weren't done losing just yet. Once 1944 rolled around, the Cardinals had to merge with the Steelers. This was due to the war. There was a shortage of players, but regardless, it didn't matter because they once again finished 0-10. John Grigas was trying to do it all that year because he was the team's quarterback and the main rusher. He threw 6 touchdowns to his 21 interceptions while running 185 times for 610 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, finally, in week 4 of the 1945 season, the Cardinals had their chance against the Bears. In the first quarter, they found themselves down 7-0 after a 64-yard bomb from Sid Luckman to Ken Kavanaugh. It looked like another loss was on the way, but the Cardinals responded with 2 rushing touchdowns from Leo Cantor, followed by the defense getting a safety in the fourth quarter. With the final score being 16-7, the Cards finally broke that 29-game losing streak once and for all. Leo Cantor and Frank Sano dominated on the ground in this one, and they really needed it too because their quarterback, Paul Christman, only went 2 for 9 with an interception. Moving on to the modern NFL era's longest losing streak now, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who lost 26 straight games throughout the 1976 and 1977 seasons. Tampa Bay joined the NFL as an expansion team during the 1976 season, and boy, that did not go too well. This was just a very sad team to watch. Throughout their first 2 games as a team, they put up a combined 0 points. Shut out in 2 straight games to start off the franchise, can't get much better than that. To give you an idea just how bad they actually were, well, they scored just 14 offensive touchdowns in 14 total games. Their leading receiver had 390 yards on the year, they gave up the second most amount of points in the league, and they lost on average by over 20 points per game during their 0-14 first season.
Unfortunately for Steve Spurrier, the Buccaneer offensive line is not yet capable of giving him much protection, and Cleveland took full advantage of this weakness.
And I'll tell you what, 0-14 was just the appetizer for what happened in the 1977 season. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 12 more losses in a row to start out the year. Now, here's the best part. They were shut out in 6 out of those 12 games. 0 points. You're rarely going to see that happen in today's NFL. Gary Huff was the Bucs starting quarterback this year and threw just 3 touchdowns compared to his 13 interceptions. Their offense ranked dead last in the league in points scored, but after scoring 7 combined points in weeks 8 through 12, they finally had enough. With a 26-game losing streak on the line, they faced off against the Saints on the road. This game started off slow with just a Tampa Bay field goal by Dave Green in the first quarter, but the Bucs had a lead nonetheless. In the second, the Bucs tacked on 10 more points thanks to another field goal and a 5-yard touchdown pass from Gary Huff to Morris Owens. Tampa's defense was actually playing fantastic too, shutting down the Saints offense and not allowing a single point thus far. It was finally all coming together for once, but a 13-0 lead was nothing to get comfortable over. Luckily, the Bucs defense was locked in that day, and in the second half, they continued to assert their dominance. The defense scored 3 second-half touchdowns on their own.
Ian Galbraith's the setback. Scott throwing. Intercepted. That could be an easy 6 points. Touchdown!
leading Tampa Bay to a 33-14 win, their first in franchise history. Gary Huff had a solid game for his standards, throwing for 96 yards and a touchdown on 9 attempts, but the Tampa defense really deserves all the credit for ending this losing streak. They picked off 6 passes that day and recovered a fumble. Before the game began, Saints quarterback Archie Manning said, quote, "We don't plan to be the ones to break their record," and that, quote, "it would be embarrassing if they lost to them." Probably shouldn't have said that because the Bucs, they took that personally. Now let's move on to a team that has really struggled for the majority of their existence. They have had a few good years here and there, but for the most part, they've been a losing franchise. I'm talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, who lost 20 straight games in the 2020 and 2021 seasons. In 2020, the Jags started off with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, and they actually won their first game of the year against the Colts 27-20.
On 3rd and 10, Rivers pass a little wobbly, it's intercepted.
They having a nice first and second quarter.
Minshew to the end zone, it's caught.
It's too bad that this was the only win they would experience all year long. 15 straight losses after that, most of them being blowouts, but there were 2 games in particular that they could have won. The first was against the Browns in Week 12. Jags running back James Robinson scored with just over 2 minutes left.
Down 8. Robinson trying to push that pile, still going.
Oh boy.
Still going into the end zone for the touchdown.
And Jacksonville was down just 2 points before they attempted the 2-point conversion. Unfortunately, the attempt was unsuccessful and they went on to lose that game by 2. The next chance they had was in Week 13 against the Vikings. James Robinson once again found the end zone late in this game to force overtime, but after Jags quarterback Mike Glennon threw an interception, the Vikings made a field goal and handed them yet another loss. Now, you heard me mention James Robinson a couple times already. Well, that's because he was the only bright spot on this 2020 roster. They tried out 3 different quarterbacks, Gardner Minshew, Mike Glennon, and Jake Luton, all having minimal success, and their defense ranked second to last in the league. Luckily for the Jaguars, when you play that bad, you guarantee yourself a good pick in the next NFL draft. And with that number 1 pick, they took quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Now, having Lawrence was a good start, but that was pretty much negated by the quarterback change they decided to make, hiring Urban Meyer. The team was once again a complete disaster, but it was hard to be worse than in 2020. After starting out the year 0-5, they faced off against the Dolphins in London. With Miami getting off to a terrible 1-4 start, this was definitely a game that the Jags had a chance to win. It didn't start out too great though, as they found themselves down 13-3 towards the middle of the second quarter. Thankfully, Lawrence hit Marvin Jones for a 28-yard touchdown to get them within 3 heading into the half.
Timeout 28. It is there. The pass is long to the end zone. It's caught by Marvin Jones.
This was a back and forth battle for the rest of the game, and with time expiring, Jaguars kicker Matthew Wright, who was just elevated from the practice squad the day prior, had a chance to finally put an end to their misery.
It's away, and he got it.
After 20 games, they finally did it. Lawrence threw for 319 yards and a touchdown, James Robinson ran for 73 yards and a score, and Marvin Jones came through big, catching 7 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown of his own. Next up, we have one of 2 teams on this list to make a losing streak span over the course of 3 seasons. We're talking about the Lions from 2007 to 2009, where they lost 19 consecutive games. It's pretty impressive to go on a 19-game losing streak while having Calvin Johnson on your team, one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game, but Detroit somehow still managed to pull it off. I'm not going to rag on the 2007 Lions team because they actually weren't that bad, finishing the season 7-9. Unfortunately for them, they just happened to lose the last game of the year, which was the beginning of this massive Detroit spiral. 2008, though, you are not safe. Calvin Johnson is the only one that's safe, and I guess I'll throw Kevin Smith in there and running back, but everybody else is fair game here. The Lions cycled through 3 different starting quarterbacks that season, all of which couldn't bring home a single win. Dan Orlovsky, who was famous for his safety out of the back of the end zone, Dante Culpepper, who was well past his prime, and a 36-year-old John Kitna. They had the 27th ranked offense, but their defense was even worse, ranking dead last in points allowed. Now, there were some close games here, but for the most part, they were blown out. 34-7 against the Bears, 47-10 against the Titans, 42-7 against the Saints. You get the idea. They finished 0-16. Once that horrendous season came to a close, Detroit decided to make a head coaching change, firing Rod Marinelli and hiring Jim Schwartz. They also drafted Matthew Stafford with the first overall pick to finally give them a solid quarterback. Sadly, the season as a whole didn't go as planned, with them finishing just 2-14, but in week number 3 against the Redskins, they finally had something to celebrate at least. The game started out much different than most for the Lions. They actually got on the board first with a 21-yard touchdown pass to Bryant Johnson.
Rather than declining the penalty, so Stafford to the end zone, down Bryant Johnson.
And kept that lead going into halftime. Despite finishing the year dead last in points allowed once again in 2009, their defense was actually holding up pretty well that day against Washington. Straight out of halftime, it looked like another collapse, though, was well on the way for Detroit after letting up a 57-yard touchdown to Santana Moss. But today was different. After that possession, the defense got back to business, holding Washington scoreless for the rest of the third quarter and most of the fourth. With a little over 5 minutes left in the game, Maurice Morris ran in a 2-yard touchdown, and the fans could finally start to feel it. The feeling of a win. Not so fast, though, because Rock Cartwright caught a 4-yard touchdown pass on the next Redskins drive, making the score 19-14. After punting the ball away with 1 minute and 12 seconds remaining, all the Lions fans could do was watch in horror and pray that the defense could get a miraculous stop. Completion after completion. Washington was driving down the field, and it looked like a collapse could be on the way. Fortunately, the clock was on the Lions' side here, and with 21 seconds left in the game, they finally started to make the necessary stops to win. After almost 3 years of waiting, the Lions finally got a win under their belts to snap this streak. Stafford threw for 241 and a touchdown, while Kevin Smith led the team on the ground running for 101 yards. Moving on to the only other 19-game losing streak, we have the 1961 and 1962 Oakland Raiders. Okay, I'm cheating a little bit here because the Raiders were actually in the AFL at the time of this losing streak, but I still wanted to include it. I must say they did have a pretty cool old logo back then, but a logo doesn't help you win games, clearly. The whole 1961 season was a disaster from the jump. In the first 2 weeks of the year, they were beaten by a combined 99 points. You heard that right, 99 points. And how many points did they score, you ask? 0. 55-0 and 44-0. Let's fast forward to week number 9. They actually beat the Bills on the road 31-22, but after that, it was nothing but L's. They went winless the rest of the year. If you thought that team was bad, you don't even want to hear about the 1962 Raiders team. They lost the first 13 games of the year. You couldn't really expect too much when their quarterback Cotton Davidson threw 7 touchdowns to his 23 interceptions, and their offense scored the least amount of points in the league. There were only 8 teams in the AFL at this point, so they were just getting beat down by the same teams over and over again. That is up until the final week of the regular season against the Boston Patriots. Clem Daniels was actually the star of the show on offense for Oakland, as he scored the team's only 2 touchdowns on the day, and their defense stepped up big, not allowing a single point for the entire day, leading to a 20-0 Oakland win. The defense put a lot of pressure on Boston's quarterback Tom Uchich, sacking him 5 times and picking him off twice. That win finally broke their losing streak and gave them some good momentum heading into the 1963 season. Surprisingly, they had a big turnaround that year and went 10-4, which is a massive improvement from their 1-13 record the year prior. All right, now let's talk about the only 18-game losing streak in NFL history. This was achieved by the Houston Oilers during the 1972 and 73 seasons. This was another case where not only the offense was bad, but the defense was horrendous too. Dan Pastorini was their leader at quarterback, throwing just 7 touchdowns to his 12 interceptions, while having a 42.8 completion percentage. After a win against the Jets in 1972, the Oilers began their historic losing streak. And there couldn't have been a better start than losing to the Raiders 34-0 at home.
And Pastorini gets out over the 10 to the 12.
After losing all the rest of their games that season, Houston finished the season 1-13, but they had so much fun doing that they decided to go 1-13 the next year as well. That's right, in 1973 they finished with the same record, only this time they planted a strategic win towards the middle of the season to ensure that they wouldn't be too high up on our list today. In week number 8 against the Baltimore Colts, the Oilers finally played some football. The Colts were also very bad that year, so if the Oilers were going to beat anybody, it had to be them. After a quick George Hunt field goal to begin the scoring for the Colts, the Oilers went crazy. They scored 3 straight touchdowns, the first being a Billy Parks 66-yard catch.
The Oiler defense followed the offensive aerial show.
The second being a Bob Gresham 4-yard run. And the third being a Mac Alston 10-yard catch. But in classic Oilers fashion that season, they decided it wasn't too fun if they didn't blow the lead. So that's exactly what they did. They let up 3 consecutive touchdowns of their own, putting them back in the same spot, losing by 3 once again.
Stan White's interception and return for the touchdown. A 1-yard Domry sneak climaxed a 9-play drive.
After trading a pair of field goals in the fourth quarter, Houston had their chance to strike, and to everybody's surprise, they actually took advantage. Lynn Dickey hit Fred Willis for a 13-yard score and sealed the win.
The Oilers touchdown came with just 32 seconds remaining.
Dan Pastorini, the Oilers starter in 1972, actually started in this game, but he threw an interception on his lone pass, so the superstar of the day was Lynn Dickey, who had an outstanding 340 yards and 3 touchdown passes. Thankfully for Oilers fans, the team got back on track in 1974, leaving that horrible losing streak in the past. All right, so far we've covered the 6 longest losing streaks in history. But when we move on to the 17-game losing streaks, there's 6 different times that it happened. So for the sake of keeping this video at a decent length, let's do a bit of a condensed run through how all these unfortunate teams ended their streaks. The most recent 17-game losing streak was the Browns in 2016 and 2017. They actually lost 17 in a row in the 2015-16 seasons, won a single game, and then went on another 17-game losing streak. It's pretty impressive if you ask me. After going 0-16 in the 2017 season, Cleveland tied their first game of the 2018 season against the Steelers to end this streak. Pretty sad way to end a losing streak, but hey, I guess they're going to take it. Carlos Hyde had a good day on the ground, scoring a touchdown, and Jarvis Landry put up 106 receiving yards on 7 catches. Even though the Browns' defense forced 6 turnovers, the final score was still 21-21. Let's go back a little bit now to when the Browns had their other 17-game losing streak in the 2015 and 16 seasons. After losing the final 3 games of the 2015 season, Cleveland didn't win again until week 16 of the next year. In that game against the Chargers, the Browns pulled out a close 20-17 win. Robert Griffin III was actually the starting quarterback during that game. He was sacked 7 times and didn't throw a single touchdown pass, but the Browns still managed to squeak out the win thanks to a couple of Cody Parkey field goals.
After the ball was snapped, Parkey's kick is good.
And a pair of Isaiah Crowell rushing touchdowns.
Griffin, and it is Crowell in for the Cleveland touchdown.
On to the St. Louis Rams now, who managed to pull off 17 straight L's in the 2008 and 2009 seasons. This team was really struggling. After going 2-14 in 2008, they managed to get even worse in 2009 and finished 1-15. But just like the Browns did in 2016, the Rams pulled off 1 win just to break the streak. With the game against the Lions all tied up in the fourth quarter at 10, Steven Jackson broke a 25-yard run to give the Rams the lead.
15, 10, 5, bye-bye, touchdown. Steven Jackson's in from 25 yards out.
Thankfully, they held on to win this game 17-10. Jackson had a big day on the ground, running for 149 yards and a touchdown, and it's a good thing he did because their quarterback Mark Bulger only threw for 176 yards and a pick. Next up, we have a familiar team back on the list, the Houston Oilers. This time they lost 17 straight in the 1982 and 83 seasons. This one was brutal because they lost a lot of close games leading up to their eventual victory. In weeks 8 and 9 of that 1983 season, Houston managed to send both games into overtime but still lost. But they finally got their win in week 11 against the Lions. After being down 17-10 in the third quarter, the Oilers got on a roll, scoring 2 touchdowns and adding on a field goal, making the final score 27-17.
Back to pass. Throws to the right, and all the way to the end zone.
Earl Campbell led the charge on the ground with 107 yards, while their quarterback Oliver Luck also threw 2 touchdowns. Now we have the only other team to join the Browns on this list for ending their 17-game losing streak on a tie. It's the Washington Redskins from 1960 to 1961. In week number 10 against the Cowboys, they tied 28-28. Bill Anderson had a great day for Washington, catching 10 passes for 168 yards, but it still wasn't enough to finally get that win. And lastly, the Dayton Triangles in 1927 to 1929. They actually went winless during their last 2 years in the league. Then they were sold and moved the franchise to Brooklyn, so we don't even have a win or a tie to talk about here. Now, I guess I'm going to leave it at that. But which losing streak surprised you guys the most? I want to know in the comments section down below. Also, if you're new, of course, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy NFL content.